I'm going to edit the same example. Before that, hope you understand. I'm just going to close my application. I'm going to hit run button. So the emulator, or in this case, assume it's a phone, loads the very first activity as soon as I hit the run button. How this emulator or this app knows this is the first view to be loaded? That exactly comes from a configuration file called manifest. You would have seen 3 different folders were there inside the app folder. The very first one is called manifest. Just click on the Android manifest. It's a configuration or manifestation file, mean the entry point of your application, or maybe for a book it is how the table of content, like that. So it's going to be a very entry point of your application. See, few things first. The name of the application is retrieved from this way, and of course the very first activity is finding a place. It looks like a XML, yes, and it has certain level of configuration which is saying launcher and main. Maybe the prefix are a little weird, but just pay attention to a few of the keywords. This exactly make your application the very first activity. Say, I'm going to do a couple of changes now. I'm going to create one more activity. Click new to the package and pick the activity. In that, we are working on the empty activity of it. Say, okay, I'm just going to create a screen called login activity. I'm not going to touch anything, just I'm going to go ahead with whatever default. Remember, you also have a choice to move between a Java and Kotlin language. Yes, we are working on Java at this point. It creates a new activity along with a new XML file called activity login. If you see this inside the resource folder, you will also have one more layout file created for it. So every activity, every layout file. Okay, so let's see this login activity. Right now it is empty, but if you just pay attention to the manifest, you will see one more entry created. This one has a login activity name added inside the manifest. So manifest will contain all the information related to your application, like how many activities, how many service, how many broadcast receiver files your applications are having. It will have a mention about number of activities or number of services or number of broadcast receiver created with respective to the application. Not only to that, it also carries certain additional information such as which one is going to act as a launcher activity, mean the very first activity. And it also carries the app icon and whatever the application name mentions, everything it contains. And more importantly, it contains the package name, which is the one we already decided while creating the very first project. This becomes the application unique identifier while we publish into Google Play Store. And along with that, it will also carry certain permissions, user permission related. For example, if your application make use of SMS, or if your application read SMS, most of the OTP validation, it is right now in Android device, it's automated. No user is just manually need to type it. Whenever the incoming SMS comes, automatically your application picks up and display it. So if your application is going to read SMS, or if your application going to make use of GPS, if your application going to make use of Bluetooth, or anything related to user privacy, we will mention the permissions here as well. So the manifest is the entry point for your application. Okay, let me run the code one more time. So expecting is there any changes happened because I added one more activity. I don't see much of changes. It just load the same screen, fine. But here I'm going to make the login activity as the first one and moving the main activity somewhere in the second. See, remember the login activity now carries the launcher intent filter. means certain attribution which tells this particular one will become the entry point of your application. Now if I run this application, you will see a different view or different activity loaded rather than the registration screen what we did. So it's different. It means any activity having a mention of intent filter and launcher and main will eventually become the very first activity to be loaded. And this is the first activity will be loaded while you click on the icon in the launcher screen. Launcher screen mean what? We call this as a launcher, or for in terms of computer we call it as a desktop. So this screen we call it as a launcher screen, because by click on this button only the application getting launched. We call this as a launcher screen. So if I click on this icon, what is the first screen to be loaded? That is actually decided by this manifest file. Now I move the login activity to be the first activity to be loaded. Okay, let's do something. Now I have a login activity. I need to connect. Okay, if the user want to register, they need to go to the registration page, or if they want to go back, they can go back to the previous page where they can log in again. So let's first design the login page a little bit. Same procedure. I'm just going to get rid of this one. So I'm going to make a linear layout. I feel that's quite easy to handle. Okay, let's make it as a scroll. That was we agreed upon, because anything which would require a user input, we recommend scroll view, though it is just a one or two text fields. I wish, because those things should have a scrollable option. Chances are the user may be seeing in the landscape format, which is the lesser height formatted one. So I made it as a scroll view. Then inside I'm going to keep a linear layout. I'm going to keep a normal linear layout. So IME option set to action next, because there is going to be an input type set to text. A lot of things are there. Okay. Text person name will do, or just we'll make it as a text, because the username could be of any combination. Could be alphanumeric also. So fine. We'll give a slightly a margin up top so that it doesn't touch the very corner of in from the top position. Copying it. I mention as a password. Make it a complete. Input type, we are going to make it as a password. Now we have, okay, so we have a username password. Okay, maybe I'll give a little padding to avoid content touching the corners. I just moved it a little bit so that it appears slightly inner, and finally put the button. Okay, we kept the login button. Let's keep the button into center. So add the layer of gravity slightly center horizontal. So center horizontal. So user click on it and he enter the username and password. Go to login. I mean, if the login goes successfully, we'll display one activity. If the login fails, we'll display another activity. Now we need to give option to register as well. I'm going to just need a horizontal line which separates. Okay, we'll so I'm going to give a R and I'm going to put one more button. So if the user prefers to log in, he can press login. Otherwise, user can choose to click register, so that we will take the user to registration screen and display the content. Let's run this example. Okay, looks fine. Not bad though. And you also have an option to scroll, so that's also we have got. If the user opt to click login, we will validate the user. Otherwise, the user click the register button. We take the user to subsequent screen. Okay, now here it comes. We have two activities now. How do I change this activity? How do I connect these activities so that my data displays based on the user click events? Of course, you can write, we can do that in various ways. But let us come here. So here the login activity. So here only the registration button is located. The simplest one would be writing a function public void on any user defined function write a user defined function. In this case, the public specifier, access specifier, return type, and on reg press is the name of the function what I am giving. The argument you can expect, I want you to keep this. The argument is of type view, which is a custom object which is available in Android SDK. So it's a kind of an object created like what we did yesterday. We created an object called student. Similar to that, there is some object called view. So we need to know what exactly the view, but I want you to create such a function first. Now, go to the activity login, find a button which is saying register, introduce an attribute called onClick, and call the function whatever you just written. Now, if the register button is clicked, I will get this function executed. So we'll have to verify it. I just type this word. So we have to test whether the register button clicks are working or not. Okay, now we have a button. I'm going to click this register. Okay, actually the output will be available. See the bottom, there are plenty of navigation or maybe small item or consoles available. In that, open the one which is called Logcat. Just pay attention to it. When you click on register, plenty of things are running. Okay, here it is. See the register button pressed, which one I typed. So whenever I click on this button, I may be getting that particular output. See the register button is called. So it is executing or it is taking the instance or it's taking the event. So whenever a button press happens, it executes this function. So on reg press is a user defined function having an argument called view can be directly given inside the XML itself for a value of on click. So on click, if you give the function name, that particular function will be executed whenever a button press or event trigger is happening. So this one, if you see that there are plenty of output, I can add certain filters. Okay, show only selected application. Okay, this, so here my own application log only will be printed. So now let me press. You see this, whenever I click on the register button, I see the event is getting triggered. Okay, so from here I am going to take it forward. Okay, let it be. Certain best practices I want to introduce at this point. System out println is a generic Java logger statement. I don't want to use it. Let us start using a log statement which Android recommends, which will print properly in the console, which also tells the label from where the application output is coming and also the value of log whatever it is. So hereafter, instead of using system out println, I am going to use log dot debug d, which will do the same job of what our system out println was doing. But instead of the, unlike that system out println, it expects two arguments. So one is the tag, maybe I can give a name of my login activity. The other one is the one, the message what we are trying to print. So register. So when the user click on registration screen, I may expect the event is triggering. Okay. Now if you see this, it is saying that from the login activity, the output is being printed. So debug, so the login activity. So I can understand, okay, so output is coming from this activity and this particular output is coming. So hereafter, instead of using system out println, we'll be using log.debug statement. So log.d will print the log statement and also it carries a label or tag in this case from where the output is coming from. So we are going to use this if at all we are trying to print something in the console. Okay, let's see this login activity. This onCreate is a function as part of activity lifecycle. OnCreate is a function, is part of Android activity lifecycle. As I was talking about, an activity is created when it first loaded on the screen and it is destroyed when the user clicks the back button. So from the creation to destruction, there is a lifecycle process going on. So onCreate is one of the function or is part of Android activity lifecycle, and it usually acts as the very first instance where we can start to detect the activity lifecycle. I'm going to implement couple of activity lifecycle methods before concluding. Resume, pause, stop, destroy. I have at this point, five activity lifecycle functions: creation, resuming, pausing, stopping, destroying. If you see the hierarchy, this is where the creation happens, this is where the ultimate destruction is happening. So I'll let you know what are all they, what way it is going to be important in terms of an activity which is going to be created, of course, which has been created in this case, which displays the login screen, but I have just implemented certain activity lifecycle method. To give a clarity, I am going to put certain log statement. Okay, instead of debug, I put a warning, but more or less similar. Nothing, maybe with a slightly different color it will appear. I'm going to name it okay. I put the log statement for all the functions. Now I'm going to run this code. I'm going to keep the logcat open so that if it is anything it is printing, it will complete. Okay, if you notice the log, you may see there are two functions called one by one. One is on create, this statement, so this particular function was called, and another one, it also executed this particular function called on receive. And you say anything else? I don't see anything. Okay. Now I'm going to do a couple of presses, or for example the bottom button. If you see this, according to this phone, it has a 3 onboard software keyboard buttons, or not software buttons, but it depends. Certain phones will have off the screen buttons, some phones may have along with the screen the buttons would be there. So this button is called back, this button is called home, this button is used for multitasking. For example, any application I want to move between, I will use it. So the previous application is there for me, then I can load. So the 3 button usually found in Android phones. So starting from left to right means the first button is back button, the middle button is the home button, the one which is there in the extreme right is always a multitasking button in most of the cases, 90% of the devices. So let's see what all the influence these things will do. Now I'm going to hit, okay, I'll just start from the beginning because it has printed a couple of them. Okay, now I'm going to hit home button. So it printed pause and it called stop. Okay. Now let me open the application. So this is the application, I hope. Okay, I'm just going to open the application again. Now if you see this, it called on resume. It did not call the destroy, it went straight away up here and it called on resume. Okay, just pay attention. I'm going to do it one more time. I'm going to hit the home button. pause and stop called, and if I try to open the application again by visiting the launcher screen, I am seeing on resume is called. One thing is very clear. The very first time the create was called, but so far the create was not called afterwards. So only the first time the create was called, after that the create was not at all called. But the resume is called multiple times only when application goes to background and while it comes back to the main screen again. So it means I'm hitting the home button, the application gone, it executed two functions one by one. First it executed pause and then it executed stop. It did not come here. So it just somewhere it is stopped there itself. Then I try to open my application again. So I just try to open the application again. I see the resume call. So the create was called only once, which I can confirm. Okay, now I'm going to do a little bit of different. Now I'm going to call, instead of home button, I'm going to press the back button. I'm hitting the back button. If you see that, it calls on pause, on stop, okay, on pause and on stop. Then finally it also called on desktop. It means your application or your activity is right now currently fully destroyed. Okay, let me open it again. Now if you notice that it is calling from create, then resume. Hitting back button calls pause, stop and destroy. Opening my application again, it calls create and resume. So a different behavior while I press the home button, different behavior while I press the back button. What exactly the application is undergoing? The application, or in this case the activity, is undergoing an activity lifecycle change. It means the creation happens only once when the very first time activity is opened. Until it is destructed, on create function never called again. So the very first activity lifecycle tells us on create is called only once when the very first time activity is loaded, and it has never been called again until it is fully destroyed. The very first idea we get from activity lifecycle. Okay, what is the home and back button is doing? Home button take the application to background, it loses the view, but the application is not destroyed or the activity is not destroyed. It means your activity is still running in background. Home button will not close your activity fully. Instead, the home button will only put the application or put the activity into the background. Okay, it is same like, if you have your Windows, you have a minimize button, close button and maximize button, right? So the home button is just doing the job like a minimize button. It just loses the view, but it doesn't kill the activity. It means it never destroys the activity. It's very simple to see. For example, I am typing here. I am typing some words here. Now I hit the home button. Now I am again trying to open my application. I see the words whatever I typed still there without anything modified. Okay. This time, instead of clicking the home button, I am going to click the back button, trying to open it again. I lost the text whatever I typed. So it's very clear, if the destroy is called, all your data is lost. Whatever temporary data you had in your activity, everything is lost if the destroy is called. But if the destroy is called, any attempt to open your application will again start from create on. So the conclusion would be the create and destroy in between whatever the sequence this activity is undergoing is called activity life cycle. So activity undergoes various life cycle methodology, and from creation to destruction, each button present in your Android phone will have a different influence on your activity. So the home button put the activity into a background, but it doesn't destroy anything. But whereas the back button, not only it put the application to background, it also destroy the activity. Means every data, whatever you kept, is lost. So activity works in a different scenario whenever different navigation happens on the screen, especially the bottom two buttons. Okay, but that's not a point we are trying to get it. Yes, there is, I could understand the creation and destruction, but there will be one more question. Okay, resume also I can somehow understand, okay, the application is coming from background and it is resuming the job. Okay, fine. But what is these two functions, pause and stop? What is the difference between the pause and stop? Why we have two functions called one by one? What exactly would be the difference? The pause is also a kind of interruption. The stop is also an interruption because it's going to stop everything. So what are all these two? What kind of difference in terms of activity life cycle these things are being kept? Very simple. If the application is executing on create and on resume means your application currently or your activity is currently visible. If your code executing on create and on resume line by one or one by one or on resume alone, your activity is visible on the screen, user is looking at it. But if your view is invisible, you will always have an execution triggered in on pause and on stop. Okay, on pause is a stage where your activity is beginning to disappear. Means, for example, an activity to appear, it slowly appears and fully displays. So similarly, when I hit back button, what exactly goes? Slowly goes down and finally disappears. So the pause is a microsecond where your application or the activity is slightly visible, but it is beginning to disappear. So on pause is a stage where your activity is beginning to disappear. Whereas the on stop is a confirmation saying that your activity is totally now invisible. But it does not tell whether the activity has completely lost the data. That depends on destroy. If your application or if your activity continuously execute on stop then to on destroy means the user might have pressed the back button so that it is totally about to get closed or destroyed. So the activity lifecycle plays an important role in terms of taking the backup of your data. This is a very important point. Suddenly, if anything happens, the user will hit the back button by mistake. Yes, by default, your data will be lost, but it will help you to recover the data. If you execute something in on pause or stop, you can start taking the data backups, and then you can restore wherever you need it. And not only to that, activity lifecycle gives us an idea whatever navigation the user have done today. For example, user might have pressed the home button or back button or call might have come or anything happens on the screen. These two functions will inform us immediately, okay, something happening on the foreground of your activity. So take actions accordingly. So activity lifecycle are very important. In this case, I just implemented 5 functions, which is somehow more than enough to understand how the lifecycle proceeds. But you can also implement a couple of other lifecycle functions. But we'll see it as our application grows. We'll start putting all those life cycle into place. But what is minimal you need to know? This is more than enough. So all 5 lifecycle functions, I want you to create a simple example. Of course, this code would be there. You can type it and test it across in your emulator. Try to hit the home and back button and see how the sequence are happening. Try to learn from it, and when the destroy is called, or when the destroy is called, when the onCreate is called, is there anything like onCreate is called without calling destroy? Just try the combination and you will come to know how the activity lifecycle works. So this example, let it be. So this is what an activity lifecycle we were about to discuss about. But now the exact concern is moving between the activity. So we have a login screen created. So if the user click on register button, I want to take the user to the another activity where the registration form we just created. So from there, the user can go back and of course again come to login screen and do the subsequent actions accordingly. Let us start the customization of this one. First one, we all know onRegPress is a function, user defined function, which has been assigned through onClick attribution here. So whenever this particular register button is clicked, it is going to call the function onRegPress. So here I am going to write one simple statement. Remember, activities cannot be treated as a normal plain old Java objects. It has to be handled with a little care, because every activity has its own process IDs assigned and they may be living in the memory through certain threaded environment in place. So for example, a process in such a case, it's a continuously running one. It may have its own memory, it may have own execution life cycle. So we cannot simply treat it as a normal Java object. Instead, we have to depend on a messenger object which is being provided in Android. We call that messenger object intent. Intent is an object what Android SDK provide to you. You can decide, for example, my intention to launch from one activity to another. If you say the source and destination, it will have the job done for you. So let me see, I am going to create a new intent. Okay, which expects 2 parameters. First one, the context or the source. This means from this activity, I would like to go to main activity class. So I am defining an intent, telling the source and destination, saying that from this activity to I am planning to go to the next activity. Then call a function called start activity with intent. So first part, I'm making help of an intent object, creating a new instance of an intent which expects 2 parameters. One parameter being the source context or the source activity. Of course, the source activity in this case login activity. If you have a little difficulty, what you can write? Login activity dot this. So from login activity dot this to reach to main activity dot class. It's a reflection. So just we will have a class prefix. So suffix, and then call this function start activity, pass the intent instance what you create. Let's see what is the change it is going to do. You see this? Now I'm going to click the register button. I see the other activity, the next activity was launched. I can hit the back button to go back to the previous activity. click on the register button, it launches a new activity. So now I chain the activities. So from one activity to another activity, my application travels. So if I click on this register button, it loads the another activity just because I execute an object called intent. This intent carries the source and destination information, and that object is sent to the Android runtime using start activity. So your intention to launch a new activity is actually happening. So there are two arguments in place. The first argument being the source login activity.this, the second one being this destination. So the intent object carries the source context as well as the destination activity instance that will be launched with the help of start activity by totally giving the instance of intent. So intent is a messaging object, what we call in the messenger object, because it carries your information, talk to the operating system, does the job in microsecond. So what exactly happened because of this on reg press button is called, it loads the other activity on the screen. Okay, now the question is coming. If you see this, since the new activity was launched, the login screen is right now is not visible. So I am seeing on stop is called. When I hit the back button, I am again seeing a resume button is called. When I click on the register one more time, I am seeing on pause and on stop called, and when I click the back button, I am seeing the resume alone being called. So what exactly is happening? Every activity has its own life cycle. So an activity usually formed as a stack, a house of cards, or maybe like one by one. We have a box on the top, another box like that. Just the stack is formed. So the stack in this case, right now the top stack which is right now showing up, here is the login screen, but when I click on the register screen, the login screen goes behind, the top stack is right now occupied with the registration screen. So with the help of intent, we can join or wire the activities, so through which the user will have the navigations to the various screens. So activity can be launched with the help of an object called intent. Intent we consider as a messenger or messaging object which carries the source context as well as the destination activity instance, and that intent object is sent through start activity. The operating system picks up and launches the intention. Of course, the intent is nothing but a kind of intention, what I am trying to intend do. So that's exactly what's happened. Okay, now we have to do a little bit of accessorization. We'll have to add little bit. For example, remember the back button will eventually takes me to the previous screen, fine, but we'll have to do few things. Some people from the Android ecosystem might not be knowing the difference between the back and home button. I've seen this scenario quite often because in Android phone, assume I'm an iPhone user, suddenly I bought an Android phone. iPhone usually carries one single navigation below, right now that also not there. So in such a case, certain set of the users might not be knowing there is a navigation is existing. So for them, it is better we give a back button here itself. Rather than giving, depending on this back button, we'll give the back button here itself. And also we'll change the label of this action bar. Okay, right now doesn't make any sense. Let's start changing them. The change can also be done through the manifest or in runtime, but I prefer to do it runtime. It gives me more control. First thing, get the instance of action bar support package. See that there are two action bar. I am importing the one which is called support. Get the instance of action bar with the help of get support action bar. Set the title say in this case login. Similarly, I'm going to put it here also. I'm going to put the text register. You see that now the relevant name is appearing. So it gives me, okay, it's a login screen. If you are entering the username password, you click login. It will take the user to the another activity, or if the user wants to click on register, user sees the registration screen, he can register his account. Okay. Our plan is to give a back button also here. So actually the main activity which carries the registration form, I'm going to put the back button here. Various ways we can bring the back button, but this is the simplest one. With the help of the action bar, call the function called set display home as up enabled. It means usually to the left of the screen is considered a home button screen. Now slightly modify the home button with the back arrows. So let's see whether it is putting or not. Now if you see, there is a back button exists. So it is because of set display home as up enabled mean convert the home button as a kind of back arrow button. So the action bar, that's what I said, this instance, the whole green bar in this case, they are considered as action bar. It can have a various accessories such as option menu as well as the navigation menus. So in this case, the navigation button, we are changing the home button as a navigation button. So it is because of set display as home, set display home as app enabled set to true, it puts the back button. Okay, clicking this won't take any effect because we are not using it yet. To make it work, we will have to write some number of lines of code. First one, on option item selected, implement this function, check if item ID equal to android.r.id.home. Check the menu item, whichever got clicked, having an ID called home, then you can assume the back button was pressed. So if you want to dismiss your activity, all you need to call finish. So if the user click on the home button or back button, it is going to execute the function called finish, which will properly shut down the activity. Let's see. I'm going to click on the register button. Now I have a back button. I'm clicking the back button. See that the activity got dismissed. It is because for the reason I'm calling the finish. So finish is a slightly a dangerous object. If you call the finish, the activity will get destroyed, and any statement what you write after the finish might not be relevant, because finish is the ultimate end to an activity. So there is no point of having further execution after finish. So finish means the moment the finish is executed, your activity would be brought into destroy mode, mean it will be totally closed. So the finish just make sure the application would be ended manually by a button click. So when I click on the back button, the activity get dismissed. Okay, so action bar already having a view which helps you to create such a view. Okay, few more also we can create. Well, think about it. But anyway, back button is there now. Now register works. Okay, though we are yet to write the part of the code here. Submit might not be working, but we have a back button now. Okay, let's create a simple application. So I'm going to assume the username is admin, the password is also admin. So if the user enter admin, I'm going to allow the user saying that you enter the right username and password. Or if the user enters anything other than that, we will display some other error message. Let's see how we can achieve that particular task. Going to the login activity. So I already have one function which is for registration. I'm going to create one more function. So on login pressed, this function I'm going to give it when the user press on the login. So I'm going to give it through on click on login pressed. So when the user click on login button, this part of the code will be executed. Okay, here I need to do few things. I have a username and password fields, so let me go back here. I have two edit texts. One is username ed, which is an edit text, another one is the password ed. So I need to get the instance of these two before I check what is the value the user has typed it. We can initialize in this way. In fact, the typecasting is not needed, but anyway, I'll try to type it. So initializing an object which is defined inside XML can be done using the function called find view by ID. The find view by ID, what it will do, it will search the XML, in this case activity underscore login.xml, look for an ID called uname underscore ed. So assuming this is the file, it is going to do a search and this is the ID has been given, so it will detect what the user has typed on this edit text. So I am getting the instance of this edit text. Similarly, I need to get the instance for password also. I initialized two objects, one object which carries the information of the username, another one is for a password. Okay, but here the real problem comes. I'm going to test if, okay, now I don't have access to the object because see, this object declared and initialized within the onCreate function. This is not the expected behavior. It has to be declared globally. So I'm going to globally declare it. I'm declaring it or making it global, so that the value which after adding the layout, I will have the username edit text as well as the password edit text field instance. That I'm going to check it here. Get the text has to be converted to a string equals admin. If the user has typed the word admin, we can compare using this way. So username dot getx, and we convert, because usually it comes with a editable object instance, so we are forcing it to become a string. Then I can use a equals comparison, which is a Java one. So I'm just going to compare whether the user has typed the word admin. And also I want to make sure the password is also typed admin, because we just hard coding the string. So the if statement check whether the username is entered admin and also the password is also entered admin, then only login success we are going to say. So if the user presses the login button, it will check what the user has typed. Based on that, it will let me to another screen, or it will alert your username password is wrong. So how do I achieve the message saying that your username password failed? Now we have an object called toast. Toast is a Android SDK object which could float a small letter or small text on screen for a small interval, like a toaster, just appears and disappears. So let's see how to create a small toast context. So it expects three arguments, the first one being the context, second one what you are trying to display, so login failed, and the final one the duration, how long you are going to display the toaster. I'll break this function into small. It expects three arguments, one being the context, second being the message what you try to display, the third being the small duration, long and short. As of now, short means shorter duration, long means slightly longer duration, and finally call the show. So if I call this one, let's see, sorry, I am going to register already. So I am going to enter something here. We see this, there is a small text, small bubble. It is saying your login is wrong. So that is because of the toast what we have inflated. So the toast typically displays a small content on the top. So if the user tried to enter something wrong, so because we are only expecting the user type admin, so if the user types something else, we will display a small toast. So now the application is slightly developing. So now we have a login form which reads what the user has typed it. So assuming if I enter admin, the error won't come because the toast has been set for a else condition only. If the user is entering admin, his login will go successful. Maybe we can put logged in successfully also. And also we have a registration button which take the user to the subsequent screen and display the content. So somehow we managed to create a slightly comprehensive design. I want you to complete up to this first. Then I will subsequently introduce what is intent and few more discussion about how the activity can be proceeded first.